Some things you need to know about your truck. When buying a used truck, okay, this is a 94 Chevy 1500. I've completely went through this truck. The motor was knocking. I couldn't figure out what it was. So I turned around and went through the whole motor. I've changed the valve covers. I've checked the valves. It was tapping on the top. Very extremely loud. Checked the valves, ripped it all apart, checked the oil pressure sending unit. I had low pressure, couldn't figure out what it was. What I ended up doing and how to fix it, the front two lifters were knocking really, really bad, really loud. You could hear them over the truck, the dual exhaust, everything. So I was worried I was gonna mess up the motor. What I ended up doing is, after going through the valves, making sure they were up to par and they were new, I went to the oil pan, changed the oil, did everything. Still had to knock it. Couldn't figure it out. So I went a little more into detail. I dropped the oil pan. You would be surprised. What had happened was the oil pump that comes down and drops into the oil. Actually, the filter had fell off down in the oil pan and was not sucking the oil up the way it was supposed to. At idle, it would idle fine. The tapping started slowing down and it near about disappeared. So I didn't realize it when I put an extra quart in it. So I had about 6 quarts of oil in this thing, and it was still knocking when I would drive it down the road, and then it would get really, really loud after a period of time. So always check the oil filter. Always check the oil filter. Always drop your pans. I went through the whole system. I went ahead and went with the rear axle. I drained all the fluid out of that. Changed the transmission strainer. I had a bad shifting problem where it was shifting really, really hard and high RPMs. Very weird. So I went ahead and I changed the shift solenoids in the transmission. And unfortunately, it fixed the problem. On top of the motor and the transmission shifting really extremely hard, it would be like it was gonna pop a wheelie at high RPMs when it would shift. And change the oil pressure sending unit, which is back behind the distributor. Now, a lot of people would forget about this engine. Okay, this is a 2-wheel drive. It's not the 350 big block 4-barrel carb, fuel injection, all this big block 4x4 stuff, okay? This is a 5.0. It is the 350. Even though the bolt patterns are different in the valve cover, it's still a 350. It's called a 350 TBI. It's got a 2-barrel injector on top of it. And you would be surprised after going through all that. And when I bought the vehicle, I had this rusty sludge in the radiator. Now, I was trying to figure out the radiator, you know. Couldn't really figure out why it was all slushed. The heater core was all stopped up. The gentleman ran nothing but water in this truck. And I mean extreme water in this truck, okay? They never put antifreeze in it since they had it, which had to be several years because it just rusted and corroded. I actually found a way to remove all the rust from inside the motor and it's actually fairly easy. It's called Metal Rescue. It actually works. It doesn't eat the block. It doesn't eat the valve covers. It won't hurt the radiator. It doesn't hurt anything in the vehicle. What I did is I actually put water in it, put the Metal Rescue in it, dumped one little quart. That's all it takes is 1 quart. I dumped 1 quart in it, ran it for about a day. Then the next day, I flushed it. I drained it, and it was nothing but milk black sludge. I took a screwdriver trying to get it out of the engine. I was sitting there stabbing the drain plug because it was not coming out the drain at all. Okay. But now you can actually look inside of this motor, and it is as clean as a whistle, and the motor is running like a top notch. There's no hesitation, no knocking, no vibrations. It actually did very good at the Metal Rescue, did very well on getting all the rust out of the motor. Now the oil, I did flush the oil and I put a new pickup tube in it. It was knocking very extremely loud, low oil pressure. So I just did a flush kit on everything from the transmission to the motor to the antifreeze, all the way to the rear axle. Okay. Now a lot of people, when they buy a used truck, they always check, okay, it's got antifreeze in it, let's do a tune-up and an oil change on it. But they're forgetting about all the other fluids that go with it. I mean, the brake cylinder needs to be flushed out, the antifreeze needs to be flushed out, the oil needs to be flushed out, transmission needs a new filter and flushed. Sometimes it could use a new shift solenoids, which are actually pretty simple and easy to change if you know what you're doing. If not, you can take it to a shop and tell them to put 2 new ones in it. This truck would actually surprise me. It is the extended cab 94 custom long bed. It's got an 8-foot bed in it. Now, it's been a little rough around the edges trying to figure everything out, but I figured it would give tips to everybody else buying a used truck and wanted to go through it and make sure it was 100% up to par. I haven't had no problems out of this. I've owned it for about 4 years. I sold it to a friend and bought it back. And the only thing he's ever changed in it was the alternator, the belt, spark plugs, tune-up, plug wires, and an oil change. Other than that, besides a wheel bearing, he hasn't really changed anything on it after owning it for a 1.5 years. So it would be very surprising, and just giving a heads up to everybody that knows about Chevy trucks, if you want it to outlast most, it's got 287,000 miles on it. And it still runs strong. It'll still eat up the tires, it'll still haul whatever it wants. I would like to get a little more power out of it, but it actually does good for a simple truck. So just a heads up for anybody that wants to do a little research on the truck.